Pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu has to install Aaron Ubonov, Aaron's children be Kohanim, and as the Orach Chaim HaKadosh explained it, that this would be ultimately, even though it's slightly painful to Moshe, because this clearly is the point where it's the point of no return. Because once Aaron is installed as Kohen, what originally was said at the burning bush, that Aaron will be the Kohen, you will no longer be the Kohen, this already remains etched in stone. But yet, this is part of the kapora, this is part of the atonement for the level of disrespect, although Moshe Rabbeinu's intent was for the sake of humility, but he overstepped his bounds. So he had to experience this at a level that despite the pain, he has to do it with a full heart, fully committed to do the will of Hashem, although it's painful, because this pain is in his best interest. And he recognizes that. And he concluded, as the Gemara says, Kashem Shivochan al Toch, Kach Mevochan al Ara, as one blesses Hashem for good fortune, one blesses Hashem for tragedy. We say the brocha, person says a brocha dayan emes, and Rava says besimcha. So he explains that a person would only understand and appreciate the value of the suffering, of the tragedy. Its value has even greater value than something which is positive in the material. He would understand that it's something, it should be said besimcha. Although we don't understand the dayan emes, because we don't understand the degree of transgression or why Hashem chose this person to experience it this way, someone differently. But since he's dayan emes, you were able to internalize the reality that it's in your best interest. I'll give you an example. You have a person needs a certain type of therapy, and you go to the expert in this field, and you have two people seemingly they have the same condition. And one person, the doctor says you need radical surgery, and the recovery and the procedure is very painful. The other person says, it's enough, you should take a certain medication and be exposed to the sun and fresh air. And the person doesn't understand, the patient, why does he have to go through all this pain and suffering to come to the same result, and the other person doesn't have to go through it? The answer is because the doctor, who's the expert and understands the nature of the illness, although superficially it seems to be they're the same, they're not the same. And because they're not the same, therefore, one has to undergo one type of procedure and the other goes another type of remedy, which is not painful. Hashem's calculation, why he does things, whether one person, this is sufficient, and another person, that's not sufficient. Because as we once said, that everything in life is choice, and choice is only choice if you have the ability to deal with the choice. If it's too difficult, Hashem doesn't give that person that situation. He's not confronted with that challenge because it's not a challenge. He definitely will fail. It's beyond his capacity. But again, only Hashem knows that. And only Hashem knows the nuances of intent. Even when we fail, why did you fail? Why did the other person fail? Person that comes from a different kind of background. Person was more adept in a certain area than the other. Slightly more. But only Hashem knows that. Therefore, Hashem is the dayan emes. So whatever happens, you accept and you understand it's out of the love of Hashem, because he's dayan emes, and he's only doing that because it's the person's best interest. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to install Aaron Ubonov, although this was the final moment where it's the point of no return. Moshe no longer has the ability to be the Kohen. I had mentioned, you see the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu in Dvorim, before he passes away, he gives Musa to Klal Yisrael, that he says that because of what they did, Aaron was involved in the Chet Egel. Not that he believed in it, but he gathered the gold and he participated rather than giving his life. And because of that, initially, the decree was they should lose all his sons, all his 4 sons. But my tefillah nullified 50% of the degree. And therefore, he only lost 2 sons, not all 4 sons. Only Nadav Avihu passed away, was struck down, not Elozli Somar. That's what he did. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have prayed for Aaron that he should not lose all his children, what would have been? Who would be the Kohen? There's only one person who's qualified to be the Kohen. That's Moshe himself. So if that would be the case, Moshe would recoup the kuna which he gave up due to the burning bush. In terms of at that moment, there's someone who is an appropriate replacement for you. Aaron, as we find often, Aaron the Shokol Keneged Moshe Rabbeinu. In the certain context, he was the equivalent of Moshe. But if there's no longer Aaron Ubanov, and we read here, why did Aaron's children become the Kohanim? Because they were his sons. But if there are no sons, so who's going to take the place of Aaron? As a result of that, we see the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. Despite the fact, you'd say he has a certain conflict of interest, and he shouldn't give it his best, and let all four sons die due to the punishment for Aaron, he prayed for them. So this shows to what level Moshe Rabbeinu, not that we have to appreciate Moshe, but even this nuance, which ultimately there's pain from Moshe, was now he realizes, now he always realized, that it's a point of no return. Nevertheless, he installed them with simcha, with joy. You should make holy vestments for Aaron, your brother. And what is the value of these vestments? For honor and for glory. I had mentioned yesterday the Gemara in Avodah Zorah, where it says explicitly who officiated the first 7 days when they had erected the Mishkan. It was Moshe Rabbeinu. He officiated. Aaron did not officiate the 8th day. That's when Aaron and his children began officiating it, when they were installed that was Yom HaShmini. But the 7th day, so the Gemara they asked Rabbi Akiva, did Moshe wear vestments or did he not wear vestments? What he officiated? So the Gemara says, they asked Rabbi Akiva, he didn't know. He went to the Vestments, they discussed it, and they said he wore a white tunic. That's what he wore. So what does that mean? He wore a white tunic. The Or Chaim discusses, but the Shalal Kodesh explains it this way, that initially it's very, very interesting. When Hashem created Adam, he created Adam. Initially, he didn't realize that he had to cover his nakedness. Why? Because he was pure. Hashem, he was the handiwork of Hashem. He created this being, which every aspect of his being was pure at the ultimate level. His only challenge, do you eat from the tree of knowledge? Don't you eat from the tree of knowledge? Once he ate and he became putrefied, then he had to cover his nakedness because his body, the physicality, represented something which had to do with sin, with evil, because evil, the Eitz Hadas was Tov v'Ra. But initially, what was the vestment? To officiate, to serve Hashem, the vestment was the body. The person is the neshama, is the soul, and the soul without a body cannot function in terms of being involved in the context of choice. So the vestment, how do you officiate? How do you do the will of Hashem? How do you meet the challenge? Through the body. So the body was the vestment. Once the vestment became disqualified because it became putrefied, so now Aaron or any Kohen, we need vestments. We need holy vestments. And only now you're qualified to officiate. However, Moshe Rabbeinu, because of his level of purity and his greatness, and he was able to prophesy even a awake state, his body, although he's a descendant of Adam, was not putrefied to the degree that it wasn't qualified to officiate in that vestment. So Moshe Rabbeinu could officiate with his body. His body was the vestment. However, it's inappropriate that since his nakedness, his genitals would be exposed, he had to cover it. So the white tunic, the Beged Lavon was just to cover his nakedness, but it wasn't a vestment. This is how the Shalal Kodesh explains it. So what I added then, when we once discussed this, the Chavetz Chaim always cites the Rav Chaim Vital, that he explains that just as we have Ramachi Vorim, we have 248 parts to the human body, there are 248 components to the neshama. And we have Ramach Mitzvah Saseh, we have 248 positive commandments. And he says there is a corresponding factor between every mitzvah saseh with a component in the neshama. For instance, when you put on tefillin, it spiritualizes a certain aspect of the neshama, which it corresponds to. When you eat matzah at the Seder, sukkah, everyone, there's a corresponding factor. And by doing the act, that's how you spiritualize that component of the neshama. So the Ramach, mitzvah saseh, correspond to the totality of the neshama, perfecting it, spiritualizing it with this infusion of mitzvah. But how do you do a mitzvah? You do the mitzvah, as we said, the body is you have to have a body. The body's challenged. Do you put on tefillin? Don't you put on tefillin? So the hand that puts on tefillin, that doing that act, that corresponds to that part of the neshama, even the hand, the eyes, the brain, whatever it is. As a result of that, that's how a person perfects his neshama. You eat, you have to swallow the matzah. Unless you swallow, one does not fulfill his obligation. You eat the Korban Pesach, you wave the lulav, every one of these. So it's interesting. So it comes out, the materials the vestments were made of, how they were made, how they were woven, and what the make of every thread was. That's all dictated by Hashem. So we ask why? Why does it have to be made this way? The answer is this vestment is actually compensating for the body. That means just as the body represents Ramach to correspond to the neshama, these vestments have to be the equivalent of the original vestment of the body. Only God knows. Why was the body created the way it was created? So we're saying to correspond to the neshama, but who understands what the soul is? The 248 parts and how, and the makeup, only Hashem. Therefore, the vestments of the high priest, of the Kohen Gadol, was l'choruv seferis. But honor and glory, because the ultimate accomplishment is that honor and glory to achieve what you have to achieve. But again, because there's this corresponding factor, the Ramach. So the vestment of the Kohen Gadol corresponds to the body, to compensate the body, which is no longer qualified to be the vestment, to correspond to the neshama, to bring about that advancement and that purpose and that shleimus which the soul needs. Very well, Sisa, big day, Kodesh, La'aron Achich L'Chavol Severis. Tzorch L'das, Mahi Kavonas Hashem Bom L'Chavol. What does it mean? For honor. Achsha Media Baseim Vofneim. I mean, after we understand what exactly, how the garments were made, what's this added information comes to verse? What level of appreciation does it give us? Aaron covered the verse. You say, well, Aaron is glorified. He says, and what's the value of that? To tell us that Aaron is glorified. She's buyer. He says, maybe he's in quote the Gemara Avodah Zarah, which we just mentioned. Sholosh Rabbi Akiva. Moshe, Kol Shivas Yimei Eluim. There's Rabbi Akiva, Moshe, the 7 days of the Mishkan, where it was erected and dismantled, what were his garments that he officiated in? Lava Biyodei, he didn't know. Rabbi Akiva couldn't respond. Also, V'shol Bei Medrasha, he went and asked in the base medrash, Omrul Cholok Lovon Shembo Emro. It was a white tunic which didn't have a border on it. That's what they answered him. Before I go further, I just want to mention what the Ramchal says. You know, if you ask anybody, where's the neshama located? The soul of a person. So it's cited, the neshama hovers over the head. The neshama is not within the body. It hovers over the head. So the Ramchal explains in the Das Tunos that initially, when Adam was created, the neshama was within his body. What was his body? Because his body was an appropriate repository to contain the neshama. But once the body became putrefied due to the ra of the Eitz Hadas, it wasn't appropriate any longer that the neshama should remain within the body. So the neshama left the body and hovers over the head of the person. It's no longer within the body. So there was a difference pre-chet, post-chet. Okay? So he says the only other human being after the chet of Adam, where the neshama was in the body, was only Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the only other person. His body was so holy, it was an appropriate location for the neshama to reside. So it's with what we're saying now with the Shalah Kodesh. So therefore, his body was an appropriate vestment. Therefore, he didn't need the vestments. These artificial vestments, which were prescribed for the Kohanim. His body was the vestment. Okay? Now, there's an Orach Chaim HaKodesh who says something somewhere. It's unbelievable. He says, it's known, based on the Zohar, that a person's made up of three parts. I'm talking the spirituality. It's nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh is the life source, ruach is the spirit, neshama is the soul. He said, a person becomes so evil that his representation, the soul wants nothing to do with that body. So the soul departs, separates from that person, and the person only has a nefesh and ruach, does not have a soul. Because of the level of evil which he brought about, the neshama doesn't even hover over the body. He exists just with a nefesh and ruach. We're saying the average person has a neshama, but it hovers, so that it's associated with the body. Moshe Rabbeinu was so special, it was within his body. The Rasha, the soul departs totally from his body, has no relationship with that body, because it has such a negative representation. So when we speak about some of this in expression, he's so evil, he has no soul. So this is rooted in Kabbalah. A person can be so evil that he has no soul. The soul totally detaches from him and has no relevance to him. And that he exists, he only exists within a nefesh and a ruach context. There's no neshama there. Okay? So now we're going to speak about the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. What's the cover of Tiferes? That Moshe Rabbeinu officiated just with this tunic, so that clearly tells us that the service is not valid. That's only for Aaron and his children. But if you would not be the Kohen and you're qualified to officiate, one doesn't need these vestments. These begodim, these vestments were not to qualify the avoda, because we see Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he didn't have vestments, the voda was valid. If it's a necessity for the avoda, Moshe would also have to wear vestments. But we see Moshe officiated without vestments. It's to put it that person was designated to be Hashem's officiant, to be on that pedestal. But if you're not Aaron or his children, it's not necessary. Avoda doesn't need it. It's something specific for Aaron and Bonov. It could be Shekhen, Shemish Moshe. As we see Moshe officiates, he's not learning like the Shalom. That what the body is the vestment. One second. Oh, Yobar. Or we say maybe this is the understanding. Kibo Hashem losis tam lobatzi shmona begodim. This is it. Why does the Kohen Gadol have 8 vestments? We'll see. Arba lovon v'arbazo. 4 of the vestments were linen, and 4 of the vestments were gold. Alan, this is talking to you. You know why 4 were linen and 4 were gold, white, and gold? Because that's covered Tiferes. There's a representation of kavod, honor, and glory. Pirish, Alpi Devreim, Zohar HaKodesh, he's quoting the Zohar. Ki hashmona begodim dal shel bigdei loven yirmazu al dal osi shel shem havayim baruch hu. The 8 vestments correspond to Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is the ultimate name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Okay? Each of the garments corresponds to one of the letters.
Rabbi,
Wait, Alan. You don't interrupt the Orach Chaim HaKodesh when he's speaking,
I'm
right?
happy. I'm happy.
The Dalit Big Day Zov and the 4 gold vestments. Yimuzu El Dalit Osir Shel Adni. Adni's master. Aleph Dalit Nun Yud Adni. That's master. V'da. Ki Shem Havaya Baruch Yisyachis Elov Kinui Hatiferes. Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's the ultimate, that's glory. The ultimate glory is represented to Yud Kei Vav Kei. That represents Midas Arachim, that represents HaYehoviyah, God is infinite. Kiyodua V'Shem Adni, and the name, the appellation of Adni, Yisachis Elov Kinui HaKovod. That's kavod, that's honor. The master, the king, the master. Who Omro Vasisa Big Day Kodesh, L'Chovod Keneged Big Day Zov. Kavod, it corresponds to, that's the gold vestments. Ultiferes Keneged Big Day Lovan. And the glory corresponds to the white vestments. The Seder HaKosev, Seder HaDrogos, HaKedusha, Zul L'Mayla B'Zu, V'Higdim L'Kavod, and we go advance the Kedusha. Kavod is Agni, Tiferes is a higher level, more advanced, as we say, Malam B'Kodesh Lo Meridin. Whenever we speak Kedusha, we always advance Kedusha, we don't diminish Kedusha. So you start at a lesser level, and you advance to a higher level. Havein, V'tziva Hashem lasos shmona begodim shemem tzusam techaper pigomim asher yisovvu b'nei odom b'sheikim l'mokem elyon. What is the value of the vestments? To bring back kapora, to qualify a person that his neshama should ascend and achieve a certain level of ascent to be in a certain location. And through that sin is able to be atoned. And the reinstatement can come about. Now we understand why Aaron had to wear these garments, not Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu's officiating had nothing to do with atoning for Klal Yisrael. That was to qualify, to establish the Mishkan to be a location, to be able to bring about atonement. But the actual atoner, he represented Klal Yisrael to bring atonement for them, that was Aaron. Therefore, he needed the vestments to address the kapara aspect. Moshe Rabbeinu was not for the sake of kapara.
Good point.
Al derech omrim zal ki hashmona bigdei kuna mechaprim al shmona mini averos, quoting the Gemara. The 8 vestments correspond to 8 types of sins. Shiyu b'nei Yisrael asher al kein lo tziva Hashem b'dover el hakohen ha'omed l'sharei Yisrael bonov kol hayomim l'chaper al b'nei Yisrael. The value of the Kohanim, Aaron and his children were l'chaper, that's to atone. Mash'enke Moshe, which is not the case of Moshe Rabbeinu. When he officiated, it was not to atone for Klal Yisrael, it's only to establish that Aaron and Bonov, they are able to what? Now to enter and officiate as the Kohanim. That was part of the initiation process. So we didn't need the garments, the vestments to atone for Klal Yisrael. Therefore, to officiate the white tunic was sufficient.
The question I want.
Aaron's level of spirituality, he qualified to be the one to represent Klal Yisrael and bring about atonement on their behalf. That's Aaron. His children had that characteristic because they were sons. They were the only ones who had that characteristic. Like only a Levi could be a Levi. He has a certain status. A person who's of another Shevet doesn't have the status of a Levi. And even a Levi doesn't have the status of a Kohen, because the elite of Levi is Aaron and his children. So they have a representation which the Levi doesn't have. Because they are who they are, therefore they were chosen l'chaper, to atone, on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Okay? And we say the 8 vestments are the tools which are provided by Hashem to be able to bring about what they're qualified to do. I'll give you an example. You have a person who's a jeweler. He has the ability to create things within, but he needs his equipment. Without his equipment, he can't develop these magnificent pieces of jewelry. Although he has the ability, he has the understanding, he has the training. Aaron, in his essence, has the ability to bring kapara, but he needs the vestments, because the vestments correspond, as he says, to the 8 sins, which through those Those are the mediums through which he brings kapara on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Pasuk Gimel. Ato tetaber al kol chachmei leiv. You should speak to all those who have wisdom of the heart. Asher mileisev ruach chochma, who are filled with a spirit of wisdom. Also as bigdei Aaron lekachol chadli, and they should make the vestments for Aaron to sanctify him, that he should be able to officiate as a Kohen. So we're not talking about having the best tailors, the most creative people. These people are infused, endowed with a Ruach Chochmah. We'll see in a moment. We're talking about Ruach HaKodesh, a divine spirit, a divine understanding to be able to bring about these garments. So they weren't ordinary garments, as I said. These garments have a level of representation, whether you learn like the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, whether it's Adni, they correspond to the 4 letters of one of the names of Hashem, or the ultimate name, which is Tiferes, is Yud Kei Vav Kei. You had to infuse them with a certain kavanah, with a certain intent, that they should function within those capacities. So when Aaron officiates, he should bring about the end result. As he's quoted the Gemara in Zvachim, that the 8 vestments correspond to the 8 sins. And that's to account for Klal Yisrael. Let's see. So over here, beautiful. We had mentioned, the Gemara says in Brachos, that it says, to who did Hashem give these, the Chochmah to? He had to be Chachmei Leiv. If you had wisdom in the heart, he gave this wisdom. Right? They had Chachmei Leiv. So the Gemara says that only a heart that contains Chochmah, wisdom, did he give Chochmah. So Rav Chaim Volozhin, the famous Rav Chaim Volozhin asks, so where does it begin? Whose heart had Chochmah, whose heart did not have Chochmah? Now, the Gemara says indeed that before a child is conceived, every level of pronouncement is made on that droplet of semen to determine the destiny of that child. Chocham tipesh, how wise you can be, how foolish you can be, or you can be wealthy, poor, strong, weak. Every aspect of that person's life is pronounced except one note. One pronouncement, not tzaddik v'rosha. And from there, the Gemara tells us at 2 locations, everything is predestined except Yerushalayim. That's choice. You have a choice. You have a choice to be a tzaddik or to the contrary. How do you invest your life? Even if you're a chocham, where do you put that chochmah? Do you put it in the right column or do you put it in the negative column? Where do you put it? That's Yerushalayim. In whose heart did Hashem put Chochmah? The heart that contained Chochmah. Which Chochmah? Reishis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. The heart that had Yerushalayim, that heart qualified to be the location to add this additional wisdom, the spiritual wisdom, to be able to infuse, to build a Mishkan, that it should be the domicile, the residence for the Shekhinah. So here, the Balaturim, take a look what he says. Chachmei Lev Asher. Chachmei Lev Asher, Gematria Yiras. Here, the numerical value is the Yiras. Misha Mile Mole Yiras Hashem. The one whose heart was filled with Yiras Shamayim. Hainu Shnema Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. That's Reishis Chochma, literally. What the way of Chaim Volozhin explains this, the Balaturim says it right here. The numerical value Chachmei Lev Asher is Yiras, and it's referring to what David says, Reishis Chochmah Yiras Hashem. So the person who had Yiras Shamayim, which is Hakol B'dei Shamayim, Chutz Yiras Shamayim, he chose to have Yiras Shamayim. That heart had the capacity to receive this, or qualified to receive this kind of wisdom, this kind of understanding. I mentioned yesterday that the menorah, it says Te'oseh, it shall be made. It doesn't say Taseh. So Rashi, last week's Parsha, cited the Medrash, that all the vessels of the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu understood exactly how they should be made. The menorah had difficulty understanding. So we asked, what was so difficult? We have pictures of what the menorah looked like.
Right.
So we explained it's not the physical form. Each vessel had another level of representation. What was the level of representation of the menorah? That's Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh is what is the infinite wisdom, represents the infinite wisdom of Hashem. As a result of that, to be able to infuse in the menorah, to bring about, activate the forces, the siyata d'shmaya, for every level of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the only one who was able to infuse it, that's only Hashem himself. Therefore, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, take the block of gold and put it in the kiln, and what came out? The menorah came out. We're not talking about it came out as a physical form, but that's teos, it shall be made. Because, as we said, the ruach chochmah that you need for the menorah, that's beyond any human capacity, even beyond Moshe Rabbeinu's capacity. Therefore, it had to be put into the fire, and Hashem made the menorah for that reason. Okay, let's see the halacha.